Hey, my beautiful queens. Welcome back to Liyue's story time. Get comfortable and prepare to have your blood pressure go through the roof before experiencing the most satisfying, soul-cleansing karma ever written. Today we are talking about a woman who survived a literal psychological horror movie disguised as a marriage, only to rise from the ashes, secure the ultimate upgrade, and drop a masterclass in revenge. If you've ever dealt with a toxic, manipulative man who played games with your sanity, Chen Wan is about to be your absolute hero. Let's dive into the top 3 most jaw-dropping, mic-drop moments of this story. On the day of my remarriage, the bridal sedan of my new groom Lin Wenyuan came to a steady stop at the mouth of the alley. An 8-carrier sedan with red silk flying, the festive sound of Suona horns nearly lifting the roof off the Zhou family's dark and damp old alley. I wore a bright red wedding dress that I'd personally embroidered with gold thread for 3 months. A phoenix crown on my head, one hand firmly holding my 3-year-old son Onion, about to step over the rotten wooden threshold of my in-laws' home. Both sides of the alley were packed with neighbors watching the excitement. They whispered to each other, their gazes woven with shock, disdain, and uncontrollable curiosity, discussing in low voices this woman, me, who had been a widow for 3 years, suffered every hardship, and finally agreed to restlessly remarry. Just as my toes were about to touch the bluestone pavement outside the door, an unusual commotion suddenly erupted at the mouth of the alley. The Suona sound was like someone had suddenly grabbed it by the throat, cutting off abruptly. The dense crowd seemed to be brutally cleaved apart by some brute force, and a man covered in mud, unshaven, wearing a tattered military jacket, stumbled out. His eyes bloodshot red. He charged straight at me, and at a distance less than 3 steps away, he dropped to his knees with a thud. The sound of his kneecaps smashing into the ground made people's bones ache just hearing it. The man lifted his head, his rough voice carrying a tearing tremor and wild joy. "Wan Yang, I came back alive." The surroundings instantly fell into a deathly silence. You could hear a pin drop. I lowered my eyes, quietly studying this face before me, that was both familiar and strange. Over these 3 years, I had sat in front of his memorial tablet countless days and nights, thinking he had died in battle, cried myself dry of tears for him, and even nearly ruined my health for him. My husband, Zhou Kes, just like that, he was alive and well, with a face full of deep feelings and guilt, kneeling before my bright red bridal sedan. Everyone around had their eyes fixed on my face, waiting to watch a scene that only exists in storybooks. A faithful widow and her dead husband embracing and crying, finally seeing better, but I didn't cry, nor did I smile. My heartbeat didn't even skip a single beat. I only tightened my grip on Anian beside me, who was clutching the corner of my clothes in fright from this sudden turn of events, and glanced down at my glaringly red wedding dress. Then, I raised my head, and through the dangling pearl ornaments, met his bloodshot eyes. My tone as steady as if discussing today's weather. "Which soldier are you? My husband died good and dead 3 years ago." My words were like a bucket of winter water with ice shards, dumped right over the heads of all the onlookers, and smashed hard into Joki's face. The wild joy, excitement, and self-righteous deep affection on his face completely froze in that instant, replaced by disbelieving shock and slightly twisted panic. "Wan Yang, you? What nonsense are you talking about?" "I'm Joki, it is me. Look at me carefully." He suddenly crawled forward on his knees 2 steps, reaching out those rough big hands trying to grab the hem of my wedding dress. "I'm not dead. I escaped back after going through countless hardships. I came back to take you and Mother to live a good life." Holding Anian's hand, I coldly stepped back, avoiding his touch as if avoiding something filthy. That avoiding movement was like a foot crushing his pitiful self-respect. Joki's hand froze in mid-air, the corner of his eye twitching uncontrollably. "Sir, please don't talk nonsense." My gaze swept over him lightly, my tone without a ripple of emotion. "I am Chen Wan. My late husband Zhou Ke died for the country 3 years ago. The pension documents and casualty list from the Ministry of War are still kept in the county office's storehouse. Today is the auspicious day when my mourning period is complete, and I remarry. Please step aside, and don't delay my auspicious hour." My new groom Lin Wenyuan had already pushed through the crowd from in front of the sedan chair and walked over quickly. He was completely different from Zhou Ke, who was covered in hostility and filth. He was a merchant, gentle as Jade, reserved and steady, wearing a brand new dark red wedding outfit, always carrying a faint, calming scent of ink. He didn't question Zhou Ke on the ground, nor did he show the slightest panic. He simply walked to my side in the most natural way, using his broad and upright figure to quietly shield Anian and me behind him, blocking all the turmoil for me. This brother here, Lin Wenyuan lowered his eyes to look at Joki, his voice extremely steady, carrying a calming power yet concealing an edge. My wife has been a widow for these 3 years. To serve her mother-in-law and raise her young son, she exhausted her heart and mind, inevitably suffering some mental damage. You perhaps bear some resemblance to her late husband and startled her. Today is my joyous wedding day, so please be understanding, brother, and go seek drinking money elsewhere. His words were extremely measured, effortlessly defining Joe K as a beggar vagrant who happens to look similar, protecting my reputation while subtly mocking Joe K's current wretched state. But how could Joe K endure such humiliation? His innate possessiveness was instantly ignited by Lin Wenyuan's protective gesture toward me. Chen Wan, how can you treat me like this? His eyes were bloodshot, and like a mad dog he suddenly sprang up from the ground, pointing at Lin Wenyuan's nose, his voice filled with the fury of being betrayed. I crawled back with barely my life after 9 brushes with death, and you're actually wearing a wedding dress about to run off with some other wild man. Have you forgotten the vow you swore when we got married? You said you'd be a Joe family person in life and a Joe family ghost in death? How dare you? Who dares to take away my Joe family's daughter-in-law? A sharp rebuke that pierced the eardrums came from inside the courtyard. My mother-in-law, that old woman who had tormented me for 3 whole years, and always claimed to outsiders that she was sickly, was now actually not using her cane and rushed out with swift steps. She saw Joe K at a glance, and exaggerated tears instantly burst from her cloudy old eyes. Wailing, she threw herself at him, pounding his chest forcefully. My poor suffering son, you're not dead. You're really not dead, Mother thought. She'd never see you again in this lifetime. Heaven has opened its eyes. The mother and son embraced in a heap in front of my bridal sedan, crying earth-shatteringly, performing with excellent acting a moving reunion drama that touched the heart. The neighbors around, who had originally been intimidated by me now, began pointing and whispering. The tide instantly turned. Oh my God, it really is the eldest son of the Joe family. This is jaw-dropping. The ex-husband really came back alive. That Mrs. Chen is so unlucky. The wedding sedan has already arrived, and her former husband shows up. How is she going to handle this? What unlucky? I think this woman is just fickle. Her man's corpse isn't even cold yet, and she couldn't wait. Already hooked up with a rich landlord. Now the real deal is here to claim her. Let's see if she still has the face to get married. Those criticisms came at me like poisoned hidden weapons from all directions, trying to nail me dead on the pillar of shame for not honoring wifely virtues. But I stood there unmoved, my heart like still water, not even furrowing my brow. My heart had long since turned into a cold, hard stone through countless freezing winter nights over these 3 years, through countless times of being beaten and verbally abused by my mother-in-law. I just looked coldly at this mother and son embracing and crying before me, watching my mother-in-law wailing dryly while glaring at me coldly from the corner of her eye. The smugness, scheming, and venom hidden in that look were exactly the same as what I'd seen every day for the past 3 years. The moment I saw that look from my mother-in-law, the last piece of the puzzle in my mind clicked perfectly into place. I suddenly understood all the dissonance, all the despair and suffering over these 3 years. In this moment, they all had the most disgusting, most logical explanation. After Zhou Qian soothed his mother, who was in a state of mixed joy and sorrow. When he turned back to me, the feigned panic from before had already vanished from his eyes. Emboldened by the accusatory voices of the neighbors around us, he straightened his back, and a kind of condescending pain and forgiveness surfaced in his eyes. Wanyang, I know you've had a hard time these 3 years I've been away. It is my fault for not taking good care of you. I'm sorry to you and Anian. He deliberately softened his voice, affecting that old patronizing tone of his, trying to bind me with morality and sentiment. But no matter what foolish mistake you've made, as long as you haven't stepped out of this threshold, I'll act as if nothing happened. First, change out of these clothes, return the betrothal gifts to this boss Lin, and let's live properly as a family. All right. He spoke so matter-of-factly, so magnanimously, as if my wearing this bridal dress was just some terrible mistake made by an unreasonable, crazy woman, and he was that generous, magnanimous savior coming to rescue me from dire straits. Go home, a family. I turned my face and looked at the dilapidated house behind him and my mother-in-law, where even the window paper was letting in drafts, It constantly reeked of a moldy, sour smell. Was that a home? That was a cage that imprisoned me alive for 3 years, drained the marrow from my bones, a hell of unrelenting suffering where I covered my mouth every night, not daring to cry out loud. Joe Key. I finally spoke again, calling out this name with both given name and surname, clearly and precisely. You say you narrowly escaped death. Then may I ask, on which battlefield did you die, and under which general's command? Back then, the death compensation silver was issued in full by the local authorities, and your memorial tablet is still enshrined in the Joe family's main hall to this day. For 3 years, I've burned incense and kowtowed for you daily, eating vegetarian food and praying for your blessings. Could it be that the Ministry of War of Great Chi issued the wrong death notice? Or is it that for these 3 years, I've been worshipping a ghost clinging desperately to life? My questions hit the vital points one after another, each sharper than the last, like an extremely sharp boning knife mercilessly dissecting his reunion act full of holes. The surrounding murmurs stopped abruptly. Great Chi treated fraudulent collection of compensation and false military reports as serious crimes. If Joe Key truly couldn't explain himself clearly, he'd be going to prison. Joe Key's facial muscles visibly twitched, a flash of panic crossing his eyes. He opened his mouth, instinctively glancing toward his mother with a look seeking help. Ginger gets spicier with age. My mother-in-law immediately caught on and jumped up. She carelessly wiped at her eye area with her filthy sleeve, then pointed her cane at my nose and started cursing. You ungrateful, black-hearted little whore. My son being able to crawl back alive from a pile of corpses is a tremendous blessing from our ancestors. Not only are you not thanking heaven and earth, but you're standing here interrogating him like he is a thief. You didn't keep to womanly virtues, getting involved with wild men early on, and now you think you're in the right. Our Joe family must have had 8 generations of bad luck to have married a jinx like you. While cursing, she relied on being an elder and threw herself at me in a fit, trying to tear at the red wedding dress I was wearing. Before I could move, Lin Wenyuan had already stepped forward, steadily gripping the old hag's swinging cane with one hand. He usually appeared gentle and refined, but the strength in his hand at this moment was so great that even with her face flushed red, the old hag couldn't pull it back. Old madam, you can eat recklessly, but you can't speak recklessly. According to Great Chi law, making false accusations means having your tongue cut out. Lin Wenyuan's voice was cold as frost, resounding firmly. Chen Wan received the death notice from the Ministry of War 3 years ago, and this is on record at the county office. She observed the full 3 years of deep mourning for your Joe family, raised your young son alone, worked like an ox or horse. The neighbors in this alley have all witnessed it. Now her mourning period is complete. The authorities have issued the remarriage document, and her choice to remarry is both reasonable and lawful. He paused, his gaze piercing toward Joe K like a sharp sword. As for your son, not only did he fail to report the death certificate, but he even changed his identity and came back from the dead. Whether this is a miraculous event or the hidden truth of a deserter, tomorrow Lin will personally bring my card to the county yamen and request the magistrate to hold court and investigate this matter thoroughly. Lin Wenyuan's words were reasonable and well-founded, even invoking the government authority, directly seizing Joe Key's fatal weakness. The crowd erupted in commotion again, and everyone's gaze toward Joe Key immediately shifted from sympathy to suspicion. That is right. How could a legitimate military household possibly not inform his family of the truth about his death for 3 whole years? Joe K's face instantly turned ashen, his eyes so gloomy they could drip water. He stared fixedly at Lin Wenyuan, like a vicious wolf whose territory had been violated. This is a domestic matter between me and my original wife. It is not your place as an outsider reeking of money to butt in. Get lost. From the moment she accepted that marriage contract from me, she became the lawfully wedded wife of Lin Wenyuan. Her matters are my life. Enter Lin Wenyuan, the man who proves that peace is the ultimate flex. Look at the absolute contrast between these two men. Joe Key views Chen Wan as property, a territory to be marked and defended with barking and aggression. My original domestic matters. But Lin Wenyuan, he doesn't puff out his chest or get into a screaming match. He stands there, smelling like expensive ink and quiet confidence, and completely shuts down the toxic ex with pure, unbothered boss energy. Her matters are my life. What makes Lin Wenyuan the ultimate standard is that he never tries to be Chen Wan's savior in a way that diminishes her power. Notice how during the whole confrontation, he steps in only to physically block the mother-in-law's cane, and to handle the legal threats regarding the fake death. When it comes to handing out the emotional karma, he steps back and lets his woman cook. He respects her agency. He knows she needs to finish this battle herself to truly heal. He is just there to be her shield, her safe harbor, and the guy holding her purse while she verbally destroys her ex. We love a secure king, Lin Wenyuan yielded. Not an inch, his tall frame standing upright like a pine tree. Two men, one travel-worn and dusty, relying on moral coercion to bark madly at the sun. The other impeccably dressed, standing on the high ground of law and reason, refusing to retreat a single step. Their confrontation pushed this farce to its boiling point, and I simply kept my head lowered quietly, clutching tightly Anian's small, ice-cold hand. Anian lifted up that thin, shriveled, yet unusually sensible little face and asked me "Mother, who is that uncle covered in mud? He is so mean. Is he a bad person here to steal our family's grain?" I crouched down, and through the tassels of the red veil, I touched my son's dry yellowed hair. My voice was gentle but firm. "Don't be afraid, Anian. No one can take away what is ours. Today, we're going to our new home to live a good life." My voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet, tense alley entrance, it reached everyone's ears clearly. Joki's body shook violently. He stared at me intently, looking at my calm, undisturbed eyes, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "Chen Wan," he murmured, his tone finally carrying a trace of genuine panic. "You never used to talk to me like this, you've changed." Hearing this, I couldn't hold back and let out a soft laugh. That was the first time in 3 years I had laughed from the bottom of my heart, laughing so hard tears were about to fall. "That is right, Joki." I straightened up and looked at him coldly. "If I hadn't changed, Anian and I would have turned into 2 piles of bones in your Zhou family's backyard long ago." My thoughts were pulled back by this cold laughter to the past from 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when that death notice stamped with the bright red seal of the Ministry of War, accompanied by 2 meager pieces of broken silver, was delivered to the courtyard, the sky above my head collapsed. Joki and I were childhood sweethearts. 2 years after we got married, shortly after Anian turned 1 month old, Joki said that a man's aspirations lie in all corners of the land. He wasn't willing to farm for the rest of his life, and wanted to join the military and go to the border to make a name for himself. He said he'd make sure me and the child could wear gold and silver and live the good life of the upper class in the future. I believed him. I thought that was a man's responsibility. I held Nian, still in swaddling clothes and crying to be fed, managing household chores during the day, and embroidering by a solitary lamp at night to supplement our income, waiting day and night for news of his consecutive victories. What came instead was a cold death notification. That day, I couldn't even make a sound from my throat and fainted directly in the courtyard from despair. When I woke up, I saw my mother-in-law holding Joki's memorial tablet, crying her heart out, utterly heartbroken. She wailed my precious child over and over, her cries piercing to the heart. In my naivety back then, I thought that in this cold world we mother-in-law and daughter-in-law shared the same grief. I thought that having lost our pillar of support, we only had each other to depend on. After the 7th-day ceremony, my caring natal family hired an ox cart to pick me up. My brother, eyes red, urged me, "One young little sister, you're still young, bring Anian home. The family won't let you mother and child go hungry. Once these 3 years are over, your brother will find you an honest and reliable family." I looked at my mother-in-law's lonely figure sitting in the courtyard and refused. I said to my brother through tears, "Brother, a woman does not serve 2 husbands. I am Joki's lawfully wedded wife. He sacrificed himself for the country, and I cannot leave his elderly mother without support. I must stay to fulfill my filial duty in his place, and I must raise the Zhou family's heir, Anian, with honor and integrity." Hearing this, my mother-in-law walked over leaning on her cane, tears streaming down her face as she embraced me tightly, burying her head on my shoulder and sobbing. "Good daughter-in-law, you truly are a good daughter-in-law of our Zhou family. Don't worry, as long as I have a mouthful of food to eat, I will never let you 2 go hungry. From now on, the Zhou family will be your fortress." I was such a fool. Not only did I believe her lies, but I also tearfully made a solemn vow never to remarry. I thought what I was holding on to was my unwavering devotion to my deceased husband, a woman's dignified integrity. I never could have imagined that what I had stepped into was a web of lies meticulously orchestrated by a beast, a mental torture that would last 1,095 days. The nightmare began to unfold the morning after I sent my brother from my natal family away. That day before the rooster crowed, when the sky was dark as ink, my mother-in-law kicked open the door to my already flimsy room. The sun's already high in the sky and you're still wailing like someone died. Does the sky fall just because a man's dead? Our hometown is poor precisely because of lazy bones like you. Now get your ass up and start the fire to cook. The pigs in the backyard are waiting for you to feed them, and the weeds in the field have grown taller than people. I woke up terrified from my dream, and Anian in my arms was scared into wailing by that earth-shattering scolding. I thought I'd heard wrong. My mother-in-law, who just the day before had been holding my hand saying over and over we'd depend on each other for survival, had overnight lost all traces of kindness from her face, leaving only meanness and ferocity. That morning's breakfast, all that was left on the table was a pot of rice soup so thin you could clearly see your reflection in it, and a dish of blackish sour pickled radish. She herself was holding a white flour steamed bun, eating it with relish, but her beady eyes were fixed on me holding my child and drinking rice soup, her mouth constantly belittling me. Even boiling water you dawdle around. What a useless rice bucket. If it weren't for the fact that you gave birth to one with a handle, my son should have thrown you out back then. From that day on, all the chores in this Joe family courtyard, and the burden of those few acres of poor farmland outside came crashing down on my back like a mountain. Me, a girl who was pampered and raised in my parents' home, whose 10 fingers never touched spring water, was forced to learn how to carry water and chop pig feed before dawn, learned to plant rice seedlings in muddy water under the scorching sun and rush to harvest wheat before the rainstorm. At night, when my back ached as if it would break, I still couldn't close my eyes. I had to sit under the flickering bean-sized lamplight, spinning thread, weaving cloth, embroidering, straining until my eyes turned bloodshot, until the latter half of the night, just to earn those few hundred wen of meager silver to hand over to my mother-in-law each month. And what about my dear mother-in-law? She was like an imperious old empress dowager. Her only job each day was to sit in the shady spot in the courtyard basking in the sun, cracking melon seeds, eating the pastries I bought, while using all kinds of vicious obscenities to humiliate me in every way possible. Chen Wan, the water vat is almost empty. Are you blind? You're trying to die of thirst, this old woman of yours. Chen Shi, you jinx. You cursed my son to death, and now you want to squander away my family fortune. The edges of the cloth you wove today are uneven. If it sells for less money, this old lady will flay your skin. In just one short year, my originally waterfall-like black hair became dry and yellow as straw. My fair and soft hands became covered with calluses and chilblains. In winter, even when the chilblains cracked open, I still had to soak them in icy water to wash the whole family's clothes. I went from 100 jin down to less than 70 jin, so thin a gust of wind could knock me over. There were some aunties around who couldn't stand watching it anymore, and would occasionally secretly slip me half a corn bun, telling me sympathetically, "Wan Yang, you're still young. What kind of life is this? That old woman is treating you like livestock. Stop enduring it. Go back to your parents' home." I swallowed the corn bun mixed with chaff and bran, shaking my head with a bitter smile. Because my mother-in-law had already cut off my escape route, she spread rumors everywhere, saying I was improper. As long as I showed the slightest intention of wanting to go back to my parents' home, she would hang a white silk ribbon in the main hall and shriek threats. "If you dare to leave, if you dare to cuckold Joe Key, I'll hang myself right in front of you. I'll let everyone know that you and your lover drove your mother-in-law to death. I'll make you carry this murder case for the rest of your life, making your life worse than death." She used the 2 heavy mountains of chastity and filial piety to pin me down firmly in hell. And back then, I actually subconsciously made excuses for her, thinking that she was just psychologically twisted from the pain of losing her son. And that as long as I became the most perfect daughter-in-law, someday I could warm her heart. Looking back now, it was stupidly outrageous. Was she psychologically twisted? She was clearly lucid and cruelly executing an inhumane domestication on behalf of her son who had escaped through death. And what made me completely abandon the last shred of hope in the Joe family's humanity was when Anian had that high fever. That winter, heavy snow sealed the mountains, cold enough to crack stone. Anian, just over a year old, caught a severe cold from going with me to the fields to pick up wheat stalks. His little face burned bright red, his breathing weak like a dying kitten. I held Anian in my arms and ran like mad to knock on the door of the main house. "Mother, please open the door. Anian is dying. Please give me even half a tael of silver so I can take him to see a doctor. That is money I earned weaving cloth every day. I beg you to save the Zhou family's grandson." I knelt in the snow, kowtowing so hard it made thumping sounds, blood from my forehead mixing with melted snow and flowing into my eyes. Inside the house, the charcoal fire burned fiercely. Mother-in-law was drinking warm liquor with a plate of crispy peanuts. The aroma of wine and meat seeped through the door crack, stabbing painfully at my stomach, trembling in the wind and snow. I hadn't eaten meat for a full 6 months. With a creak, the door opened a crack. Mother-in-law held her wine cup, her gaze as cold as if looking at a pile of garbage. "What, doctor? Life and death, our fate. His father was short-lived to begin with. Who knows if this little brat is just here to collect debts? Let him be. Can't even survive a cold. Raising him would just be throwing money away. I need to save that money to buy a coffin. How could I have spare grain to fill this bottomless pit?" Bang! The door was mercilessly slammed shut, and the bolt was even latched. In that instant, I seemed to hear something inside my heart shatter into dust with a crack, accompanying the sound of the door closing. The blood in my body dropped to freezing point in the ice and snow, yet was instantly reignited by an extremely terrifying hatred. Even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. She could watch her own son's flesh and blood die right before her eyes. In her eyes, Anian and I were just 2 lowly dogs she could trample to death at any time. I didn't cry anymore. I silently stood up, wrapped Anian tightly against my chest with my thin, worn padded jacket, and stumbled into the raging heart of the snowstorm. That night, I broke down the door of the black market doctor's house in the deepest part of town, notorious for his ruthless and cruel methods. "Doctor," I stared at the awakened doctor with lifeless eyes, my voice as hoarse as sandpaper. "Save my son. I'm penniless, but I can trade my life for his." I pulled out the only wooden hairpin from my head, and my withered yellow hair that still reached my waist fell loose. This hair of mine was originally excellent quality. I heard the wig makers in town buy it. How much medicine fee could it cover? The doctor frowned and shook his head in disgust. Without hesitation, I pulled out a pair of sharp scissors I usually used to cut thread from my chest, rolled up my sleeve and exposed that arm which was not only skeletal but covered in frostbite. "Then, what about blood?" I stared at him intently. "Rich families need blood as a medicinal primer. I'm young, and though I'm thin, my life force is strong. However much you need, I'll give that much. Just exchange it for fever-reducing medicine." As I spoke without the slightest hesitation, I drove the tip of the scissors directly into the skin of my forearm, and warm blood beads instantly rolled down. The black market doctor had seen plenty of desperados, but in this moment he was frightened back a step by the mad, mutual destruction look in my eyes. He stood stunned for a long while, then sighed and snatched the scissors from my hand. He didn't take my hair, nor did he draw my blood. He only took the 15 copper coins I had on me and threw me 3 packets of the strongest fever-reducing medicine. What a sin. Get the hell out of here. Why must a woman push herself to become a vengeful ghost? That night, I sat in the drafty woodshed, finished feeding Anian his medicine, and watched as his breathing gradually steadied. I gazed at the howling north wind outside the window, my eyes dry and tearless. That bit of childhood affection I had for Zhou Qi, the moral shackles of the identity Zhou family's daughter-in-law. On this snowy winter night, they were completely frozen to death by the bitter cold, dying cleanly and thoroughly. From that day on, the weak and compliant Chen Wan no longer existed in this world. My sole purpose for living was to take Anian with me, survive like a proper human being, and then repay every injustice I'd suffered 1,000 times, 100 times over. After seeking medicine on that snowy night, I thoroughly understood one truth. In this man-eating Zhou household, tears couldn't protect my child. Only money could save our lives. The turning point came the day I started taking the cotton cloth I'd woven by staying up all night, secretly bypassing the nearby markets, and walking to the largest fabric shop in the town 10 miles away, Jingshu Pavilion, to sell it. Before that, I would set up a tattered straw mat in the dirty, chaotic market. Those vendors and shrewd housewives bullied me, a widow with a child, viciously driving down prices. A bolt of fine cotton cloth I'd woven with bloodshot eyes and blistered hands could often only be exchanged for a few handfuls of coarse rice and a few pitiful copper coins. It was the kind-hearted Auntie Wang next door who couldn't bear to watch anymore, and secretly gave me a hint. "Wan Yang, Your skills are no worse than the embroiderers in the city. Why not try Jingshu Pavilion? I heard the owner there, Boss Lin, is the most fair and doesn't bully the weak. With a nothing-to-lose attitude, I carried my sleeping Anian on my back, clutched my finest bolt of cloth, and stepped across the mirror-clean threshold of Jingshu Pavilion. The shopkeeper Zhang of Jingshu Pavilion looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my faded, patched old clothes and dry hair, his eyes immediately overflowing with the contempt characteristic of a merchant. Shoo, where'd this beggar come from? We only serve high-ranking officials and nobles here. We don't take coarse cloth from country bumpkins. He waved his hands like shooing away flies. My heart sank heavily. I swallowed my broken teeth, and just as I was about to turn and leave, a clear and gentle voice came from behind the Huangwali wood screen. Shopkeeper Zhang, let her stay. Bring the cloth over for me to see. The person who walked out was Lin Wenyuan. He wore a moon-white long robe with subtle patterns, his posture straight, his features so clean he didn't look like a calculating merchant, but rather like a scholarly gentleman full of learning. He didn't look at my tattered clothes, nor did he offer that uncomfortable kind of pity. He simply took the cloth from my hands earnestly, his fingers carefully feeling the texture, then shook the cloth open and held it up to the light to examine the density and color of the warp and weft. Cloth, did you weave it by yourself alone? He lifted his head, a trace of obvious amazement flashing through his usually calm eyes. I clutched the corner of my clothes and nodded nervously. The stitches are extremely fine and dense, the warp and weft uniform throughout, without the slightest coarse feel of broken threads or piecing. Even the old weavers of Jiangyan would be hard-pressed to have this level of steadiness. He gave an extremely professional evaluation, then looked up at me, his tone calm. With such excellent skill, you shouldn't be buried in obscurity. How much money do you want? I clenched my teeth, mustered up my courage, and quoted a price that was a full 30% higher than the market rate. That was enough for half a month's worth of medicine for Anian. Shopkeeper Zhang gasped beside me and sneered mockingly. Gone crazy from wanting money. What an outrageous demand. I thought the deal had fallen through, and my fingers went cold as I prepared to pick up my fabric. Unexpectedly, Lin Wenyuan nodded directly without any negotiation. A fair price. The craftsmanship is worth it. As he spoke, he personally had the accounting office weigh out the full amount in silver and hand it to me. Before leaving, he said to me, "From now on, whenever you have fabric or embroidery, bring them directly to me, Lin, however much you have. Jingshu Pavilion will buy it all. We'll never lowball you." That was the first time in 3 years of widowhood that I felt respected as a person. He didn't avoid or look down on me because I was a widow whose husband had died, didn't offer charity or pity because I was dressed in rags. He simply treated me as an equal business person making a living with her own hands, and gave me the dignity I deserved. From then on, I became a regular supplier to Jingshu Pavilion, like a wild weed in desperate straits finally getting a taste of dew. I frantically absorbed nutrients, my life, thanks to this private money that couldn't see the light of day. Finally had a glimmer of hope. I could secretly buy eggs for Anian, could make him new clothes without patches. Of course, I kept all of this tightly hidden from my mother-in-law under the pretense of going out to work in the fields, because I knew clearly that if she saw even half a copper coin, she would pounce on it like a leech and suck it dry to buy meat. During those 2 years, my interactions with Lin Wenyuan inevitably increased. He taught me to distinguish the patterns that city folks liked best, and would specially save a few bundles of the finest Jiangnan silk threads for me. He never overstepped boundaries to pry into my family affairs, but every time he saw me, he would conjure up like magic a small piece of pine nut candy wrapped in oil paper and hand it to Anian. Anian's face, which was always filled with fear, would only bloom with the smile a child should have when seeing him sweetly calling out Uncle Lin. Gossip naturally arrived right on schedule. My mother-in-law caught wind of it, not only smashing the shuttle of my spinning wheel but also pointing at my nose and cursing me as shameless, and seducing wild men to sell my body. I never knelt to explain or weep like I used to. Holding a kitchen knife, I stood expressionless at the kitchen doorway looking at her, saying flatly, "Curse me one more time, and tomorrow this pot in the house can forget about having rice in the water." She was intimidated by the murderous aura in my eyes, and from then on only dared to curse behind my back. Lin Wenyuan and I were completely innocent, but I knew in my heart he was the only light I could see in those days that were like mud, until a little over a year ago, When he came bearing betrothal gifts and formally stepped through the Zhou family's broken threshold, that day he didn't hire a matchmaker, but personally brought expensive tea leaves and bolts of cloth, dressed in formal attire, and appeared in this filthy courtyard. When mother-in-law saw him, she looked like she'd seen a ghost, grabbed a broom covered in chicken shit, and was about to hit him with it, spewing disgusting curses from her mouth. "Shameless wild bastard. In broad daylight, you dare come steal my Zhou family's daughter-in-law, ruining my Zhou family's reputation. I'll beat you to death today." Lin Wenyuan didn't dodge, didn't even furrow his brow. He let that dust-covered broom brush against his expensive long robe, grabbed mother-in-law's wrist, and gently pushed. He stepped over the mess scattered throughout the courtyard, looked at me calmly, and said his first words, "Chen Wan, I've seen the government documents. Your mourning period is complete. I've already smoothed over the remarriage paperwork. Marry me." I stood by the well, still holding a basin of cold water with ice that hadn't melted, my whole body frozen. He looked at me, his eyes without a trace of a businessman's calculation, only sincerity so heartbreaking it was unwavering. "In business, we talk about planning before acting. I've watched you for 2 years. I've seen what kind of hell you've been rolling around in, and I've also seen how resilient you are in your bones. I want to let you and Anyan live the kind of life normal people should have." He paused, stepped closer, and spoke word by word the sentence that I would remember for lifetimes to come. "Wan, I don't need you to uphold these soul-crushing, murderous chastity principles. I just want you to live freely and happily. Marry me, and you won't have to soak your hands in ice water on snowy days anymore. Won't have to strain your eyes late into the night. Anyan can attend the best private school, and you can do what you love. No need to take the blame for others. Just live with your head held high, like a person should." In that moment, the grievances, despair, and forbearance I'd suppressed for 3 years collapsed like a bursting dam. I didn't cry because I knew I couldn't afford to be weak right then. I just looked straight at him and asked, "Aren't you afraid of being gossiped about by the neighbors?" "I'm a widow with baggage, and that old hag will cling to us like a vampire." He smiled, warmly yet with the composure of someone in power. "People's mouths are their own. Our life is ours to live. As for that old hag or other petty scoundrels, I've been in business for 10 years. What kind of demons and monsters haven't I seen? I can protect you. I only ask you one thing, Chen Wan. Are you willing or not?" The mother-in-law beside us was so furious she fell to the ground throwing a tantrum, her curses venomous to the extreme. But in my world, there were only those clear, resolute eyes. I dropped that basin of ice-cold water and nodded firmly. "I'm willing. I spent a whole year, enduring all kinds of insults and abuse, using the money I secretly saved up to completely break free from my weak and greedy family, handled all the divorce papers and documents, and even personally sewed this dazzling red wedding dress stitch by stitch with the best and most expensive fabric. Everyone thought I was clinging to a rich person for a life of luxury. Only I knew that I agreed to marry him because he treated me as a complete person and pulled me out of the mire. It is that simple, yet it weighs more than 1,000 pounds. My thoughts violently snapped back from the long memories, returning to this absurd and ugly confrontation before my eyes. Joki was still staring at me, unwilling to give up, his eyes full of accusations, saying, "How could you betray the vows we made before?" Mother-in-law's wailing on the ground also continued, as if I were an unforgivable, adulterous bad person. I took a deep breath and gently pushed aside Lin Wenyuan's arm that had been protecting me. I walked step by step to Joki, the bright red wedding dress rustling loudly in the wind. "Joki, didn't you want an explanation in front of everyone? Fine, let's talk." My unusually calm demeanor made everyone present feel an unexpected chill down their spines. A flash of self-satisfied delight crossed Joki's eyes as he hurriedly rubbed his hands together and said, "Good, Wanyang. You must have been forced into this, right? Let's go inside and talk. Whatever you want to know about how I survived these 3 years, I'll tell you everything." "No need to go inside. We'll talk right here." I coldly interrupted him, my sharp gaze sweeping across the faces of all the neighbors watching the commotion like a blade. Before the magistrate, before all the neighbors, there are some things I must get to the bottom of today. I ignored him and turned to walk straight toward the mother-in-law, who was still throwing a fit on the ground. Seeing my ice-cold gaze that looked at her as if she were a dead person, her wailing involuntarily caught in her throat. Her eyes began darting around frantically like a rat's, but her mouth remained stubbornly defiant. "What are you looking at me for? Let me tell you, Chen-shi, my son has come back alive. Don't you dare think you're stepping out that door today. In our Zhou family, even if we have to tie you up, we have no custom of letting you go. Mother, I looked down at her from above and calmly asked the question that had sickened me countless days and nights. These 3 years, you actually knew all along, didn't you? You knew your precious son hadn't died. Who knew? You're talking nonsense and slandering me. I don't know anything. Mother-in-law's voice suddenly shot up so high it cracked. That self-incriminating panic and bluster made me sick. Instead of getting angry, I laughed, a laugh bone chillingly cold. This made all the neighbors who had their ears perked up instantly erupt in chaos. Without waiting for her to make more excuses, I turned around and, under everyone's shocked gazes, lifted the hem of my wedding dress and walked back to that dark, damp woodshed where I had lived for 3 years. Moments later, I came out carrying a worn camphor wood chest. Opening the chest, on top were a few tattered old cloth garments I didn't want. But under everyone's watchful eyes, I didn't hesitate to pull out from the hidden compartment at the bottom of the chest a stack of tightly wrapped letters that had already yellowed at the edges. Those were from half a year ago when my mother-in-law forced me to clean out the latrine that was clogged from the foul stench, and I accidentally discovered them under a crack in the broken bricks next to the outhouse. Ridiculous, isn't it? She prided herself on being clever, yet out of laziness, she was so careless even about where she hid the letters. When I stood in the early spring sunlight again, holding that thick stack of letters, my mother-in-law's legs seemed to have been broken on the spot, and her whole body collapsed to the ground like mud. And Joe Key, who had just been wearing a deeply affectionate and righteous expression, the moment he saw that stack of papers, his pupils shrank to pinpoints, and his face instantly turned deathly pale. I walked in front of Joe Key, held up the first letter high, slowly unfolded it, and read it aloud in a voice cold and hard as iron that the entire alley could hear. My dear son Care, reading this is like seeing you, after you left. That cheap hussy Chen indeed cried her heart out. Utterly heartbroken. Your mother, following the plan you laid out before leaving, also put on a good show of coughing up blood. That little whore's family wanted to take her back. But I firmly blocked them. You just focus on your grand undertakings outside with peace of mind. At home, your mother is keeping an eye on her for you, guaranteeing she won't escape. Though this method is risky, it is the only way to test whether she is loyal to you, and whether she can preserve her chastity. May my son get rich soon, and return home in glory. Ladies, I need us to pause and take a collective deep breath, because the audacity of this man is actually staggering. We've all heard of modern toxic men setting up fake Instagram accounts to test their girlfriends. But Joe Key really said, "Hold my beer, I'm going to fake my own death, trigger a grieving process, and let my mother starve my wife and baby for 3 years just to see if she is a good girl." This is narcissism on a level that requires a PhD to unpack. He didn't fake his death to escape enemies. He did it to feed his fragile, insecure ego. He wanted the ultimate ego stroke of watching a woman break her back, sell her blood, and ruin her youth in the name of her devotion to his ghost. And let's talk about the mother-in-law, the ultimate enabler. She watched her own grandson almost die of a fever, just to keep her son's twisted little game going. But what I absolutely love about Chen Wan in this moment is how she doesn't just cry or scream. She brings receipts. She lets him perform his little "I braved death to come back to" new theater production in front of the whole neighborhood. Waits for him to take a bow, and then drops a nuclear bomb on his reputation. She didn't just divorce him. She legally, socially, and morally annihilated him. My voice was extremely clear, without a trace of trembling. Every single word was like a heavy hammer struck by thunderous drums, smashing hard onto Joki's hypocritical mask, smashing into the ears of all the neighbors. The huge alley entrance was silent as death. Not a sound to be heard. Everyone was dumbstruck, gasping in shock. Faking death? Testing chastity for the sake of so-called loyalty? He actually fabricated a death notice and faked his death for 3 years? So the 3 years of suffering, hunger, and humiliation weren't some calamity of fate denying me time, but a beast-taming trap conspired and set for me by my most trusted husband and his mother. I looked at Joki trembling all over on the ground, the corners of my mouth curling into a cruel arc, and unfolded the second letter. Chen went to work in the fields today and fainted from exhaustion on the ridge, then was carried back by those nosy peasants. I punished her by withholding water and food for 2 days. Let's see if she dares to use fainting as an excuse to slack off again. This woman now doesn't dare to resist in the slightest. You weren't wrong about her back then. She really is a stubborn fool who is easy to manipulate. The third letter, that useless burden. Anayan caught smallpox and probably won't survive. Chen knelt in the heavy snow begging me for money, which I naturally didn't lend. Anyway, she is just a money-losing good for nothing. Better off dead, saves us from having another mouth to feed when you return with your accomplishments. Who would have thought that little bitch had such a hard life? She actually cut her own arm to sell for money and saved the girl. What rotten luck, one letter after another. Those hardships I thought were fate's injustice. Those moments of despair I endured alone, gritting my teeth until I bled dry of blood and tears. Even the life and death crisis when my child nearly died. Turns out, there had always been 2 pairs of venomous snake-like eyes coldly watching me from behind, judging me, recording with smug satisfaction my laughable loyalty. They weren't hardships. They were a death trap my husband set for me, in collusion with his mother, to satisfy his disgusting desire for control and his masculine vanity. When I finished reading the last letter and violently hurled that stack of papers at Joki's face, this man who was acting so righteous just moments ago completely crumbled. He fell to his knees with a thud, the muscles on his face twisting together from extreme shame and panic. Wanyang, that is not it. Let me explain. He reached out with trembling, muddy hands, trying to grab my bright red wedding dress. I just love you too much. I was afraid that if I told you straight up I wanted to go do business and travel around, you'd resent me for not staying home. I was afraid that once I left, you'd be dazzled by the outside world. That old hag had already completely collapsed on the ground like a rotten piece of wood, making gasping sounds from her mouth, her eyes rolling back, looking at this man kneeling on the ground, groveling and begging, the man I once loved to the bone, the man I almost died for in a burial sacrifice. Right now, I only felt a churning nausea rising in my stomach. You were afraid I'd be dazzled, so you had to destroy my heart. I looked down at him, my gaze like I was looking at a lump of stinking rotten meat. Joki, you don't love me at all. What you love is nothing but a puppet who obeys your every word, lets you mother and son suck her blood and drain her dry, never talks back even when beaten to death, and still has to be grateful to the Zhou family and set up a chastity memorial arch. Your love truly disgusts me to the core. My words were like bone-scraping cold wind tearing his last fig leaf to shreds. He was left speechless, could only knock his head against the bluestone slabs, his forehead bleeding, repeating like a desperate madman. I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Wanyang, will you forgive me, please? I have money in my pocket now. I've made money. Let's start over. From now on, I'll be your ox and horse. I'll give you my life. Start over. I coldly turned to the side and pulled out a Nian, who had been hiding behind Lin Wenyuan's legs all along. Joki, ask your biological son if he is willing to start over with you. A Nian stared with a pair of clear, distinct eyes at the man kneeling on the ground, kowtowing and bleeding. In his gaze, there was no natural call of father and son, only deep fear and disgust. He hugged my leg tightly and said in an extremely clear, childish yet cold voice, Mom, I don't know him. He is the bad man who made Mom bleed in the heavy snow. I don't have a father. My father already died 3 years ago. A child's words know no taboo. Yet each word was like a knife, each knife lethal. This was Anayan's truest memory, and also the brand seared into this child's marrow from 3 years of hunger and cold. This sentence, identical to what I'd said at the beginning, became the last straw that broke Joe K. His eyes filled with endless despair and remorse. He suddenly collapsed to the ground, covering his face and wailing like an abandoned stray dog. And the neighbors who had witnessed this horrifying scam were now completely in an uproar. Various contempt, curses, and even anger wanting to go up and kick the mother and son came flooding in like a tide. Beasts. To be able to curse your own flesh and blood to death. These are truly living beasts wearing human skin. Utterly conscienceless. Poor Mrs. Chen was played like a monkey for 3 years and nearly lost her life. Why forgive such a heartless and ungrateful man? Mrs. Chen, leave quickly. Go with Boss Lin. Don't get tainted by the Zhou family's bad luck. Amid the indignant crowd, no one mentioned wifely propriety anymore. Everyone wished they could nail this mother and son to the pillar of shame, but I still stood in place. Neither sad nor happy. I had no satisfaction from avenging a great wrong, nor wild joy from successful revenge. I only felt tired, a kind of exhaustion after breaking free from heavy shackles, wanting only to breathe a mouthful of clean air. This lingering torture that had lasted 3 years was finally going to end today with a decisive full stop. I took a deep breath of the cold, sharp, early spring air. Then, in front of everyone, under the shocked gazes of the fallen mother and son, I raised my hand. I pulled out a golden, gleaming phoenix hairpin from my hair bun. This phoenix hairpin was made with money I earned by weaving 10 bolts of premium cloud brocade after staying up through 30 all-nighters. During those 30 long nights, Onion was running a fever, and I couldn't even afford a packet of sugar water. I tossed the phoenix hairpin down with a clang, throwing it right in front of Joe. Then, I untied the smooth jade pendant from my waist. This jade, I chiseled ice and washed clothes in the frozen river during the dead of winter. My hands were so mangled and bloody, I couldn't even hold chopsticks. I saved up bit by bit from the few dozen when the neighbor paid me to run errands. Where were you that day? Your mother was inside eating piping hot mutton, while your son and I were drinking cold wind. Crack, the jade pendant hit the ground and shattered in two. What fell next was the gold bracelet on my wrist. Finally, amid the sounds of everyone gasping, I publicly removed the bright red wedding coat I had sewn myself, embroidered all over with intricate gold thread, and laid it flat on the muddy stone pavement. With the coat removed, what I wore underneath was a coarse cloth garment that had long since been washed until it was faded white, even patched in several places. This was all the dignity the Joe family had given me these 3 years. I crouched down, grabbed a handful of sharp-edged pebbles from the ground, and ruthlessly, mercilessly scattered them across that magnificent, garish red wedding coat. Joe K. I looked coldly at the man on the ground, my voice like the king of hell demanding a life. You and your dearest mother, under the banner of love, tested me for 3 years, a full 1,095 days. Now I've remarried before I leave. I'm also leaving you a test. Didn't your mother say that the Joe family's reputation is more important than life? Didn't you say you were willing to compensate me with your life? I pointed at the wedding dress on the ground covered with stones. Starting today, let that paralyzed old hag of yours go through the days I've lived these past 3 years. Not a single day less. If Hollywood ever makes a movie out of this, this is the scene that wins the Oscar. This visual is pure cinematic perfection. By taking off the luxurious red wedding dress, Chen Wan is stripping away the illusion. She forces Joe K., the mother-in-law, and every gossiping busybody in that alley to look at those faded, patched rags. She is essentially saying, you want me to remember my place in your family. This is what your family offered me. And throwing the stones onto the dress, pure poetry. She didn't ask for his money or his life. She simply returned his energy. The definition of karma is giving someone exactly what they gave you. And Chen Wan delivered it with a bow on top. She bound Joe Ki to his own twisted morality. You want to be a filial son. Great. Watch your mother freeze and starve for exactly 1,000 Joshua days, just like you made me do. She didn't murder them. She just locked them inside the exact same prison they built for her and threw away the key. That is not just revenge, honey. That is establishing healthy boundaries with extreme prejudice. The wasteland I cleared with my own hands, let her plant it with her crutches. The hunger I endured, let her go begging for food. The freezing cold I suffered on the coldest winter days, if you dare light even one charcoal brazier for her in the house, may you Joe Ki be struck by lightning and die a horrible death. 1,095 days, if she can endure and survive like an animal. I'll burn a stick of incense before Buddha and tell the king of hell I've forgiven you. My words, each one dripping with blood, vicious and resolute to the extreme. The surroundings fell into deathly silence. How was this a test? This was clearly going to torture that wicked mother-in-law's remaining half-life to death by 1,000 cuts. The mother-in-law who had just been trying to fake unconsciousness to escape, hearing these words, was so terrified her eyes rolled back. This time she really did let out a keg-hang sound and truly fainted from the shock of a stroke. Joe Keg's face was pale as a sheet, desperately crawling forward on his knees. Wan Yang, let me take her place. Mother is old and can't endure it. I'm willing to suffer for her, please. You can't take her place. I coldly interrupted him, not even sparing another glance at that mother and son. These stones represent every single drop of blood I shed over these 3 years. You don't need to answer to me, just leave it to heaven to judge. After saying that final line, I turned around decisively. I straightened my spine, took Anian's hand, and step by step, without looking back, walked toward the red bridal sedan that had long been waiting open for me at the alley entrance, walking toward my new life, walking toward the bright path that belongs to Chen Wan. The wind picked up, the early spring breeze still carrying a bone-chilling coldness. Lin Wenyuan strode forward quickly, without hesitation removing his expensive dark red outer robe and steadily draping it over my thin shoulders clothed in old garments, blocking out all the cold wind and filthy gazes. He asked nothing, nor said another word, only in full view of everyone, extremely naturally and firmly grasped my slightly trembling fingers that were tense. His palm was very broad, very dry, so hot that my cold heart suddenly shrank, then slowly melted. The neighbors in the alley fell silent as crows, automatically parting to both sides, clearing a wide path for us. In their eyes there was no longer the criticism, mockery, and contempt of the past. Instead, there was deep shock, admiration, and even a silent sense of shame and inferiority. I could clearly hear the heart-wrenching, agonized howls coming from behind me, Zhou Qi sounding as if he were being torn apart by a wild beast. "Wanyang, don't go. I was wrong, Wanyang." Along with the dull thud of his head kowtowing against the stone slabs, it echoed through the empty, dilapidated alley. But I didn't look back. I didn't give him even a glimpse from the corner of my eye. Guided by Lin Wenyuan, I stepped over the muddy ground, bent down, and sat inside the bridal sedan that truly belonged to me, the one that came for me. The sedan curtain fell heavily, completely severing that rotten and foul chapter of years that belonged to the Zhou family. "Lift the sedan," the wedding attendant's bright voice pierced the sky. The lively, cheerful sound of Suona horns once again broke through the clouds. This time, no one could interrupt it. That sound was no longer cacophonous and grating, but rather like a stirring, triumphant song, carrying me toward a future of equality, peace, and respect. After that day, we completely left that small town that carried all my painful memories. Lin Wenyuan brought me to settle down in a misty, rainy water town in Jiangnan. That was a spacious courtyard built by the water. Pushing open the carved wooden windows, one could see the black canopied boats with oil paper umbrellas on the river, and the noisy cries of vendors selling freshly picked lotus seed pods at the bridge. Most importantly, Lin Wenyuan didn't go back on his word. With his support, I was no longer a weaver girl who stayed up all night straining my eyes just to make ends meet. On the most bustling street next to our home, he opened an embroidery shop for me called Wan Pavilion. He said, "You are my wife, but more than that, you are yourself. Your astonishingly brilliant embroidery skills should be displayed in the Hall of Honor, not buried away by the kitchen stove." 3 years of working without rest didn't break me, but instead honed my skills. Fei Wan Pavilion Fei became famous throughout Jiangnan in just half a year due to its novel designs and top-tier embroidery. I hired over a dozen apprentices and became the head proprietor whose word was law. The wives of neighboring officials and wealthy merchants loved to come here to drink tea and view embroidery when they had nothing to do. They never asked about my origins, only knowing that Boss Lin's wife was an extraordinary woman with learning and natural grace, who could turn stone to gold with her own 2 hands. Anian also officially enrolled in the best academy in the area. He gradually forgot those childhood memories of hunger, cold, and the fear of being blamed for everything. Every time Lin Wenyuan came home from work, the little guy would charge at him like a firecracker, shouting, "Daddy," loudly, and then be hoisted over Lin Wenyuan's head, giggling gleefully in the courtyard. Days slipped by like flowing water. When I was fiddling with the abacus under the warm sun checking accounts, looking up to see that father and son chasing each other around the courtyard with a kite, I would often have an illusion as if in another lifetime. Then my waist tightened. Lin Wenyuan had somehow walked up behind me, bending down to gently rest his chin on my shoulder. "What is Madame Lin staring at so intently? If you make a mistake on the abacus, this husband won't cover the deficit." His eyes held finely scattered amusement as he teased. I reached back to pinch his warm hand, the corners of my mouth stretching in an uncontrollable smile. "No mistake. Just thinking how lucky I am, having made a deal that is all profit and no loss. Yes, this prosperous scene is truly wonderful, and I deserve such wonderful times." Originally, I thought that with Zhou Qi's obsessive, selfish, and pathologically controlling nature, sooner or later he would track us down to Jiangnan like a mad dog to cause trouble. But strangely, for 3 whole years, not only did he not appear, there wasn't even half a word of news about him. It wasn't until later, when shopkeeper Zhang from Jingsu Pavilion returned to his hometown to visit relatives, that he casually mentioned to me the recent situation of that mother and son from the Zhou family. Shopkeeper Zhang said with a sigh that on the day I left in the bridal sedan, Zhou Kek knelt in that rundown courtyard for 3 full days and nights, kowtowing until his head was bloody and broken, until he completely dehydrated and passed out. That mean old hag, because she was scared shitless by my ruthless words that day, had a complete stroke on the spot. Not only was she half paralyzed and bedridden, she couldn't even speak clearly anymore, left with only a crooked mouth, slanted eyes, and drooling. After Zhou Qi woke up, it was like he had lost his soul. He never went out adventuring to trade goods again, nor did he step out of that broken alley even once. He just shut himself away in that old house that was like a prison cage, and began to carry out the Itzenin Joshuwu Day's trial I had set for him like a walking corpse. Shopkeeper Zhang said that because the old hag was bedridden, her temperament changed drastically, her temper extremely violent, the slightest displeasure, and she would use her only movable left hand to knock over the chamber pot Zhou Qi brought her, making the whole room reek. And Zhou Qi actually only fed her 1 meal of leftovers and scraps each day. Even in winter, he absolutely refused to light a charcoal brazier, leaving the old hag to freeze on the bed, convulsing and screaming miserably. That old hag suffered a fate worse than death like this, barely hanging on for a full 3 years, but ultimately couldn't make it through that winter, dying in a bed of moldy, tattered cotton wadding. Outsiders all said it was karmic retribution, and after handling the funeral affairs, Zhou Qi became completely ruined, turning into a drunkard who numbed himself daily with cheap liquor. After hearing all this, the abacus in my hand still clattered away without even pausing for a moment. There wasn't the slightest ripple in my heart, no satisfaction, nor any pity that ground full of pebbles representing pain back then. Did he think he could wash away his sins with that kind of self-torturing method? How ridiculous. True letting go means no hatred, no resentment, no concern. That dilapidated wooden door, I had already welded it shut with my own hands 3 years ago. The rotting, stinking past behind that door, and I, Chen Wan, have long belonged to 2 different worlds. In this vast world, I thought there would never be any intersection again in this lifetime, until Anayan turned 8 years old. During the Lantern Festival that year, an unprecedentedly grand lantern fair was held in the Jiangnan city. I wore a Suzhou embroidered moonlight dress and was carefully protected in Lin Wenyuan's embrace, as we admired lanterns along the riverbank amid the sea of people. Anian up ahead held an exquisite glazed rabbit lantern in her hand, bouncing along and turning back to make faces at us. On the long bridge, lanterns blazed bright as day, their reflections in the water like a fallen galaxy. Amidst all the city's clamor and flowing radiance, I seemed to sense something and casually glanced across the crowded throng toward the opposite shore. Across the river, beneath a dark old willow tree, I saw a person, Zhou Qi, 6 years unseen, and he was just past 30, yet aged like a withered old man on death's door. He wore a tattered, padded jacket of indiscernible color. His spine hunched, his hair streaked with glaring white strands, and his hand clutching tightly an almost empty cheap wine flask. He stood there rigidly in the dark shadows, across the wide moat, across the myriad brilliant lights, representing a peaceful and prosperous age, staring at me from afar. Fixedly, his gaze was extremely complex. There was heart-wrenching regret, the emptiness of having lost everything, and the humility of not daring to step half a foot out of the shadows. Our eyes met by sheer chance in mid-air for an instant. Just an instant. Time seemed to overlap in that moment. It was the same Lantern Festival, except that impoverished yet boastful young man full of grand ambitions, who swore to make me an official's wife, had long since died completely in his schemes and hypocrisy. I looked at that man on the opposite bank, like a rat in a gutter, without a ripple stirring in my heart. I merely withdrew my gaze with utter calm, as if looking through empty air. "My lady, are you cold?" Lin Wenyuan's gentle voice came from beside my ear. He casually tucked a strand of hair from my temple behind my ear, following my earlier gaze toward the opposite bank, but didn't see anything unusual. Not cold. I turned my head, eyes curved in a smile as I took my husband's arm, my smile reaching all the way to my eyes. "Husband, Nian has run far ahead. Let's hurry and catch up. You promised me you'd win first place at the lantern riddle contest at the bridge ahead." "All right, as you wish." Lin Wenyuan grasped my hand in return, wrapping my cold fingers in the warmth of his palm. I didn't turn back again. Without any lingering attachment, I melted into that world full of brightness, warmth, and vibrant life. I didn't know how long Joki stood under that cold willow tree, nor did I know whether he was watching me or watching the life he himself had shattered with his own hands. But I knew that his 1,095 days of bitter penance held no meaning whatsoever. He would never receive my forgiveness or redemption. Some things are like a shattered jade pendant. Once smashed to pieces, they cannot be put back together, nor do they deserve to be. Because he feared losing, he tested and tormented. And in the end, what he lost wasn't just a virtuous and obedient wife. What he lost was the best Chen Wan in this world, who had once been willing to trade her own flesh and blood for his without any consideration. And I, Chen Wan, after crossing through the mire and abyss, have long since climbed to the highest peak, without relying on anyone with these hands of mine alone. I've already embroidered a brilliant and magnificent tapestry that belongs to me. Lin Wenyuan's side story people in the business world all say that I, Lin Wenyuan, am a smiling tiger, smooth on the outside but principled within, who never makes a losing deal. They're right. The first time I saw Chen Wan was in the back courtyard of Jingshu Pavilion. It was the dead of winter, and she wore a tattered jacket so threadbare it couldn't block the wind at all. She tightly held a sickly child in her arms and clutched a piece of coarse cotton cloth in her hands. Shopkeeper Zhang wanted to chase her away. I was behind the screen and originally didn't want to meddle, until I caught a glimpse of her eyes through the gap. What kind of eyes were those? Clearly mired in filth, clearly frozen until her lips turned purple, her hands covered with grotesque cracked chilblains. Yet in her gaze, there wasn't a trace of groveling humility, only that fierce determination like wild grass, to take root and survive even unto death. I walked out and bought her cloth at a high price. At that moment, even I didn't realize that the string in my heart that calculated everything so clearly had been thrown into disarray by her. Later, she became a regular at Jingshu Pavilion. I watched her like a piece of uncut jade. Even though she was ground down bloodied by a den of wolves like the Zhou family, she still gradually bloomed with astonishing brilliance through every stitch and thread. I even started paying extra attention to the gossip about her. I didn't believe that her late husband, who forced her to sell her flesh and blood for medicine money in the heavy snow, was some true hero who died for his country. So, I used my business connections in Jiangnan and the capital to check an old file at the Ministry of War and that so-called battlefield. The result disgusted me and enraged me. Joki wasn't dead at all. Not only was he not dead, he had never even been to the battlefield. He faked it with the 2 taels of pension money from the Ministry of War, changed his name, and went north to trade furs, even finding himself a mistress. And that seemingly frail old mother of his would secretly go to town every month to receive a letter from the north. This insane mother and son were using the most despicable methods to break in a hawk. They wanted to completely shatter Chen Wan's backbone and turn her into a dog that belonged only to the Zhou family, working tirelessly without complaint. The night I uncovered the truth, I sat in my study the entire night. I had originally thought my feelings for her were just a merchant's appreciation for talent, or a man's sympathy for the weak, but upon learning she was tightly coiled by such a venomous snake hiding in the shadows, what arose in my heart was uncontrollable killing intent, and a mad possessive desire to take her under my own wing. Why should the priceless treasure that I, Lin Wenyuan, have set my eyes on, be trampled in someone else's mud pit? I began to lay out my plan without showing any emotion. I smoothed the way for her remarriage documents with the officials, and I calculated that Joki would most likely return to his hometown in glory after the 3-year period ended, thinking he had successfully tamed her. So, I didn't expose everything early, because I knew that Chen Wan was a woman who was soft on the outside but strong on the inside. If I, an outsider, were to reveal the truth, she might break down and be devoured by gossip. What I needed to do was give her enough respect, give her the confidence to survive independently. Then, when she completely saw through the Zhou family's true colors, and was utterly disillusioned with that scumbag, I would extend my hand to her. On the day I went to propose marriage, getting hit by that old hag's broom was intentional on my part. I wanted to see if she would feel sorry for me. I wanted to tell her that my shoulders, Lin Wenyuan's shoulders, could bear all the world's malice toward her. On the day the bridal sedan arrived at her door, Joki indeed came back from the dead as I had predicted. When this mud-covered man knelt before her self-righteously, the hand I hid in my sleeve had already gripped the sleeve arrow. If Joki dared to hurt her even a bit, I would have made him into an actual corpse. But my Wan gave me the biggest surprise. She didn't cry, didn't make a scene. Like a true queen, she took that evidence, which I had originally planned to present only in court, and cleanly nailed that mother-son pair to the pillar of shame. At that moment, I stood behind her, watching her resolute departing figure, my love for her burning like wildfire in my heart. That evening, in the new house in Jiangnan, I lifted her red bridal veil, and with reddened eyes she said to me, "Boss Lin, my reputation is now in shambles, and apart from these hands, I have nothing. I don't understand what you see in me." I held her hands, no longer plagued by chilblains, but still bearing thin calluses, and placed them against my heart. Wan, businessmen, all seek profit, and you are the rarest treasure I've ever coveted in this lifetime. I didn't tell her about the hidden arrows I'd blocked for her during those 3 years, nor did I tell her about my schemes when I uncovered the truth. Love doesn't need to be held hostage by such heavy debts of gratitude. I only need to know that from now on, in the misty rains of Jiangnan, the one holding an umbrella to shelter her from wind and rain will be me, and that fool who once tried to break her wings will remain in the hell he wove for himself, never to be reborn. Oh, my queens, let me tell you, reading this story had me needing to take a walk around the block. It hits so hard because it deconstructs one of the most toxic myths society feeds women, the idea of struggle love. For centuries, women have been socially conditioned to believe that our worth is measured by how much pain we can endure for a man. We are taught that if we just stick it out through the cheating, the poverty, the disrespect, or the absent partner, we will eventually be rewarded with a happily ever after. Zhou Qi weaponized that exact societal expectation. He banked on the fact that Chenwan's sense of duty and morality would keep her trapped in his mother's house of horrors. But what Chenwan realized, and what I want every single woman watching this to internalize, is that loyalty requested by a toxic person is just a chain. True love doesn't require you to sell your blood to buy medicine for your child. True love doesn't test you to see how much abuse you can take before you break. And isn't it funny how toxic men always panicked when you finally match their energy? Zhou Qi thought he was coming back to a broken, submissive puppy. He never anticipated that the fire he put her through would forge her into absolute titanium. The most beautiful part of this story isn't even that she married a wealthy man. It is that even before Lin Wenyuan formally proposed, she had already saved herself. She was secretly weaving, selling her goods, and planning her escape. Lin Wenyuan didn't give her a life. He just provided the funding and the safe space for the empire she was already building. And look at her now, running Wan Pavilion, living in a gorgeous riverside home in Jiangnan, with a husband who looks at her like she hung the moon. Meanwhile, Zhou Qi is stuck in a dilapidated freezing house, wiping drool off the mother he colluded with, watching a woman he could have had live her best life from across a river. Chef's kiss. Remember, never settle for a man who demands your blood, when there is a man out there who just wants to hold your hand. Love you all. Mwah!